Bonjour, hello everyone. Happy New Year. I am speaking to you from Cornwall, Ontario, which is my home community, and it's located on the traditional territory of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne. So I should also say Stego, which is hello in Mohawk as well. It's an honor to be here. I listen to you as well. I watch your socials and I'm inspired by your work. And so when you ask me to show up, I will make every effort to do so. I want to talk to you a little bit about my experience and maybe some of the things that I'm trying to do to join the effort, right? And to continue to make changes in our workplaces and in our communities. And I'll just start with a personal example to me when I was in law school at the University of Ottawa, years and years ago now. I won a scholarship and I was so proud to have won this scholarship, which was going to allow me to study at two other universities, a joint program. And when I won it, one of my colleagues came up to me and said, "Oh, you probably won it because of a diversity requirement that the program may have put in." And so the worst part of that story, it's not that this colleague felt comfortable enough to come and tell me this. The worst part of that story is that I believed him. I believed that I was there simply because I was supposed to bring some diversity to the program. And so I am hopeful in saying that I think we've come some ways from there, but I think that we still have a long way to go. I was one of two Black law students in my graduating class. And so that was a very lonely place. And I have to tell you, in my now 3 decades of career, where I've had different workplaces, that sense of loneliness continues. And so what I'm going to say to you now is an effort to alleviate some of that loneliness for myself personally, but for others as they work on this issue of inclusion. I have had many workplaces over my career. So when I left law school, graduated, I moved to Cornwall and became a lawyer with the Legal Aid Clinic. I am still with the Legal Aid Clinic. So as a senator, I can continue to do some part-time work as long as it doesn't interfere with the priority of the Senate. And so I am still at the Legal Aid Clinic here in Cornwall. I, along the way, taught as part-time faculty at the St. Lawrence College here in Cornwall. And then along the way, served 3 terms as a city councillor and then became the first woman mayor of Cornwall and the first Black woman mayor in Ontario. So let me just stop there for a moment. Being the first, it's definitely a place of honor, no question. But it's also a place of great pressure and also a place of loneliness. And so it wasn't always easy being the only one or one of 2. And the murder of George Floyd in 2020 was a moment for so many of us. But for me personally, it led to a commitment for me to take up more space in my workplace, more space in my community, in public, and more space, meaning I am going to talk openly about the importance of diversity, the need for diversity, the importance of inclusion, and not just from a representation perspective, although that's important, but from a competence perspective. And I'll just explain to you what I mean here. So I'll use the municipal example because it's one I know well. When you sit around a council table and everybody more or less looks the same, or comes from a similar background, or from a similar demographic, you're going to struggle a bit more to find solutions that reflect an increasingly complex world. So, for example, a municipality, and I love to talk about municipal because that's the most important level of government. I know I'm a senator and I'll get to that in a minute, but really civic municipal governments are the closest to the people. And they do everything from dealing with goose poop in the parks to climate change, to a building relationship with Indigenous populations. They do everything. And so when you have infrastructure around a wastewater treatment plant, you have contracts worth $60 million. You have stewardship over the St. Lawrence River, for example. You have poverty issues in your community where you want to design recreation programs so that they're accessible for kids, no matter their level of income. These are complex issues. And when you have a diversity of people around a decision-making table, diversity meaning LGBTQ+, women, men, Black people, Asian people, trans people, all kinds of people with different backgrounds and experiences. The more diversity you have around the table, the more competent you're going to be in dealing with complexity. Diversity means you're going to be able to turn to your neighbors and your partners, and you're going to be able to dig deeper into solutions because you've got all of these different backgrounds and experiences to inform your solution finding focus. So I speak about diversity and inclusion more and more these days from a competence perspective. It makes you more profitable, more competent to actually seek out and install diversity. I gave a talk last year to a law firm. So this law firm invited me to speak exactly on this topic. And I was honored to be invited because they clearly were trying to find solutions in terms of increasing diversity, speaking to inclusion in the work that they're doing and within their workplace. And when they asked me for practical, concrete actions, I kind of smiled because on the Zoom screen, everybody's face looked the same. There was very little diversity within the law firm. And it's like, okay, so hiring, partnering with groups that have diversity, supporting projects that have diversity as a focus. You need to be sending those messages out because guess what? Diverse people, we are looking for those signs of welcome, those signals. Do you know that I am 57 years old and a senator? So I speak from a place of power, right? I still walk into every room, every meeting space, and scan that room to see who's in that place. Who's here that looks like me? Who isn't here? And if there is no one that looks like me or no one that is diverse, I don't feel as safe. I don't feel as comfortable. I feel I have a perception of that workplace as being maybe not welcoming. Maybe I don't feel as comfortable speaking my mind, or I feel pressured to be the one that has to raise diversity issues. That's not cool either, by the way. I sometimes just want to be a senator and raise issues that everybody else gets to raise. But if I'm the only Black senator in the room, I then feel an obligation, and I do feel that obligation, and I do take it up, to be the one raising the equity issues, the diversity issues. And that's not necessarily fair, right? Now, when I go into those spaces, I'm also looking for allies. And obviously, we all have to work on that. I work on that very deliberately in Indigenous spaces. I'm not Indigenous, but I am learning to become an ally, a proper ally in those spaces. And so I understand that if you're not from a diverse background, if you're not Black or not Asian or not LGBTQ+, then, what is your role? Well, your role is to make sure that your partner, that you're raising those issues, that it's not always the diverse person in the room raising those issues. And I think this leads me to a discussion around having uncomfortable conversations, right? So when you're actively working at inclusion and diversity, you also have to deal with conversations about how people are feeling. People can feel excluded from that process. You know, I was talking to a group of high school students recently, and we were talking about my being the first Black woman mayor, diversity, and you know, a young white male teenager asked me. He said, "Well, I'm feeling a bit left out of this conversation, or I'm feeling like there may not be space for me." Now, there was a silence after that question, but you know what? I appreciated that question, because I think that we need to lean into those difficult conversations. We need to engage in people's feelings about being maybe defensive, maybe excluded. How can I be a better ally? Those are not always comfortable conversations. So I think as part of this work that we're doing, we all have to commit to leaning into difficult conversations. I want to end what I'm saying, and I would love questions, by the way, if that's okay. But I'd like to end what I'm saying by focusing on the Senate, which is where I am now. I had to resign as mayor to become this, to be appointed as a senator. You can't be elected and appointed at the same time. So it was very hard for me to step away from being mayor, because there was a lot of great work that was being done, and I was so happy to be a part of it. But when I stepped into my role as senator, I was able to join the African Canadian Senators Group. So for me, it was the first time in my career that I was able to walk into a workplace and there was already a group of people that looked like me that was welcoming me. And so it was quite an incredible feeling. Now, once I joined that group, I realized there's still so much work to be done, right? So even though we have an African Canadian Senators Group, there are 8 members at this point out of a total of 105 senators. When I go into committee rooms, so most of our work is done in committee where we're reviewing legislation, we're interviewing witnesses. Most of the witnesses we interview are not diverse, are not from diverse backgrounds. So there's work to be done there. When I'm in a committee room, I'm often the only person of color in those rooms. So I continue to be lonely in a lot of parts of the work that I do. And so every time I speak to groups like your group, that's the message I say. I just put it out there. It's I want to be less lonely. I want to have people join me in the workplace. I want to have allies. I want to be an ally. And I think we have a ways to go. I will say this, the new mayor of Cornwall is Mayor Justin Towndale. He's a person of color. During the last municipal elections, I was able to mentor a diverse group of candidates in Ottawa and in Cornwall. They were elected. So I think that mentorship, coaching, and your organization already knows this, is key. It's key to encouraging people to be the first or to continue and join others. It's also helpful for me in terms of me needing inspiration in the work that I do. So this is where I feel most useful. Alors, merci pour votre écoute concernant ma carrière, et si vous avez des questions, des commentaires, j'apprécierais. So if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much. I see there's a question from Sunita Gupta in the chat. First, I just want to honor what you were talking about, and As always, my brain always starts going when you're talking and connecting it to other conversations I've had. And recently I was at a women's sports summit in Calgary. And so we're in a room full of women, various backgrounds, very diverse, talking to young teenage girls that are playing volleyball. And some of the amazing conversations we had is, as always, those lunch conversations. When you're amongst people where, like you said, you're in a room that is just brimming with love and acceptance, and we're constantly quoting to each other, just show up exactly. Someone said, I'm nervous to go on stage. And I said, you couldn't be in a more loving, supportive room. Show up exactly as your full entire self, demonstrate to these young women. And so not all rooms are like that. And so it was actually, hard for us to shed that, got to act this way and say the right word and really just show up as who we really are and lead fully. So that was what I was reflecting on, is how hard some rooms are, as I was a young woman working in sport, and often the only woman, and often 20, 30, 40 years younger. So that intimidation factor and the armor you put on to just enter that space, versus being in a space, as you said, where you're welcome and understood, and people see you right away. So really,
I like your use of the word. Yeah, I like your use of the word armor. It's interesting and very real. And there's a problem when you're wearing armor.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So what I was sharing with one woman, where I said, I have to tone this down, I have to soften this, I have to. And I said, but what if, and not all rooms are safe to do that in, but in this particular place, I said, what an amazing opportunity to shed that armor, show up exactly as who you are. And the more we are able to practice that with some safety, is also, then your people can find you. So when you're talking about finding the allies in the room, is that we have to show up and be able to speak. And I think Paulette earlier spoke about, showing the signs that I'm here and I'm interested. So, for me, using pronouns is a way that I hope signifies for people that I'm going to understand you, and that I'm an ally to the LGBTQIS plus community, and that, I'm here and I could be a person to approach. And then also what you talked about is, how lonely it is, and some of the conversations I've had, particularly in sport, and building on the conversation we just had with Paulette, of sometimes we're going into a lot of sports settings that is mostly white male leadership. And some of the facilitators and women that we're working on for doing gender equity within the sport sphere is also, as a queer Black woman, she said, I don't feel safe. And there's some conversations, Chrissy, please leave those conversations. It is harmful for me. And so that really helped me in terms of what's my role in speaking about racism and how to become anti-racist in a space as a white woman. When we're collaborating and co-conspiring, is like, how do we get this message across? What is my role? How can I speak up? And what a relief it is for her that she doesn't have to lead that conversation, because we've spoken about it and we know that's for me. I can take that conversation because it's not as personally harmful to me, and they may hear it from me. They may open up, and not, because she said, I can see the fear in their eyes. When I'm about to speak about racism, their armor goes up. And so she said, you actually might be able to reach them. So those are some of the things that came up for me in your conversation. So is that sort of accurate in terms of aligning with your experiences?
Absolutely. I like to use the words emotional labor too. So when we are speaking about our own personal experiences, and believe me, I do so all the time because I know it's helpful. It's concrete and it connects to people, but it's labor, and it's extra labor that I do in addition to the other work that I do, for which I get paid for, right? So it's extra. And so when people acknowledge that extra, I feel better about doing it. And yeah, I'm very much an ally in Indigenous spaces, and I'm learning. And by the way, I'm stumbling and making mistakes, Chrissy, and I'm listening and I'm asking, help me here. I want to do what I want to do, but I'm going to make mistakes. And that's, I think, where we have to be, where we sometimes have to be brave, right? And as allies, be brave, make mistakes, regroup, and keep at it.
Absolutely. Emotional labor. That's what you called it. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. So, Chrissy, would that be emotional labor to go into a restaurant and be stressing about not being overlooked for a table because you're black? Would that be related to that?
It is, and also just a conversation that I had with a younger Black woman going into spaces is we talked about the emotional labor that she puts in coming to a conference like such as today. How do I present? How am I going to choose to present myself? How will I wear my hair? What outfit will I wear? So Alex, I know you're wearing your suit today. When you wear your traditional, your mother's clothing and that you had reconfigured into a shirt from Nigeria, that is emotional labor that you have to think, how am I going to be safe to show up? How can I make sure people can hear me? If I wear my hair in my curls versus having my hair straightened, those are conversations and work. So just talking about the extra,
Yeah.
emotional labor of that, plus, and the anticipation, as you talk about your restaurant experience, the anticipation of when conflict's going to come because of your lived experience of knowing it's coming, preparing yourself, and taking all the steps you can to mitigate, to minimize potential conflict.
Absolutely. Never even looked at it like that. But it takes a toll on me sometimes. Like I was sharing with them, went into a restaurant and it was an all white, nice restaurant. I thought it was X smart, by the way. They are not smart. They're really X dumb. And, I said hello to those in front of me, hello to those behind me, just make my presence felt. This is the only black family here, my wife and 2 kids. And when a very nice table came up right in front, the guy picked the family behind me to go take it. And I'm like, oh, excuse me, I was here first. And I'm looking at this other guy and his family for support. They walked past me completely to take the table. And the man's like, oh, sorry about that. There's a table out we're creating in the back for you. I said, really? And by sending me to the back of the bus, I say, you're very racist. And as I was leaving the place, the white family by the door says, don't play the race card, get out of here. And he's sitting with his wife and 2 kids. My fear is not even for him because he's done. It's for the kids who saw him not being an ally. And this was a family-friendly restaurant, X-Mart in Collingwood, right? So I go into places just like you, and I have to, okay, how am I going to protect myself from being overlooked or being this? And I find out that I spend so much mind power doing that it becomes exhaustive. So let's not take the conversation. I want to bring Sunita in, who asked that question. Sunita, I give you the right to unmute, and I want you to at least meet the senator. You have a great question. I have a follow-up question after that. So Sunita, please introduce yourself, where you're joining from, and what's your question to the senator?
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. So I am joining from Kingston, Ontario. Sorry, recovering from a cold as well. And I am working in the space of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So great conference. And Senator, with your political experience and hearing that you also had some teaching experience at the college in Cornwall, I thought, this is something that I've been trying to raise quite a bit, like whether it is in my circle of influence, as they say. Why is Canada not the plight of international students? And time and again, we read about that in media. They don't have allies here because in some ways they're sort of that they are not citizens, they're not permanent residents, they're the sort of forgotten community or a demographic, but a demographic that now suddenly everybody's talking about because we are short of workforce. And suddenly we want to increase the number of hours they can work, but the unethical practices of recruitment and how, at the federal level, IRCC perhaps allows the numbers, colleges are regulated by the provincial government, and the impact is seen at the municipal level in the communities. And no one is talking about it because it is someone else's problem. So is this something that you see come up in your circle? Is this being talked about at a higher level? I see it, and perhaps because I'm of Indian origin, a lot of them are from India, and it hurts to see when you read about the numbers that are ending up committing suicide and whatnot. And there's a funeral home in Brampton that chimed in that CBC episode that I'm referring to. And they said like the number of bodies that they're sending back home to India. And I don't think the common person is aware of this.
I think you're right that the common person isn't aware. And I think we need to, just like you're doing now, raise this issue. I can tell you, though, that we are in municipalities, we are aware, certainly in municipalities where there are college campuses and universities, we're aware. And we are talking about it in Ottawa, for sure. So as senators in Senate committees, when we're talking about immigration, as we do all the time, we have meetings with the immigration minister. What you've said has been raised time and time again. I'm speaking at St. Lawrence College tomorrow evening with the Mayor of Cornwall, and we're meeting with students, and we're going to be talking about a variety of issues like the ones that you are raising now. I had a meeting with some local developers, with some local employers just last week here in Cornwall area, and they want to make sure that these students are safe and happy, and that eventually that they consider Canada as a home, so that there's a pathway for them, not just to come and pay the high fees, but also a pathway for them becoming members of our community, people that are able to work in the different places where everybody's screaming for labor. And also joining smaller communities. For example, we don't just want students to stay in Toronto and Ottawa. We want them in smaller centers like Cornwall and Kingston. So yes, we are talking about these things. I am talking about these things all the time. I think we lack a lot of awareness in terms of the regular Canadians out there understanding the depth of the problem. But we also lack coordination from a government perspective. I really think municipal governments and provincial governments and federal governments need to work more effectively together. Right now, I'm finding like everybody's doing their silo thing, and that's not really the way that we should be going. But we are trying. We're making effort.
Thank you so much. That in itself is encouraging to hear that there are rumblings at other levels. Thank you.
Definitely rumblings. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Yes, thank you for coming to ask that question. We still have 3 minutes or so left with the senator. Please put your question in the chat if you are comfortable asking. We'll give you that moment, but put your questions in the chat or your comments so that we can recognize it as well. But while that is going on, you talked about 105 senators in Canada. As you spoke, I quickly Googled it, right? And I checked it out. I'm like, okay. And I did the math on Excel. I just find out what don't mind me, I'm crazy, but I love data. So I'm doing the math, pull up, and I said quickly 8%. You talked about the black senators. So what do they really work on? It sounds like a crazy question. Yeah. Yes, like sometimes we wonder, what do they work on? Why is it moving so slow? If you are the final decision maker, why is it moving? Not you, of course. I'm talking of the Senate and the Parliament and all this. How do we hold them accountable, especially because some are appointed and not necessarily elected? So perhaps you can give us that 1 minute overview.
Sure. So, most Canadians don't know what the senators do, and that's part of the part of the work that I want to do is to talk about what we do. Elected MPs make legislation in the House of Commons. It has to come to the Senate for us to review. We're a sober second thought, right? So we work mostly in committee where we do research to review that legislation that's being proposed. We interview witnesses, and then we propose amendments that so as to make sure that the legislation that's being created properly reflects different regions, different interests, different diverse backgrounds. So we're there to make sure that the legislation reflects, communities. So that work is it's a slow process. And it requires a lot of time to interview witnesses to make sure that we get it right. But there's still some representation issues. I mean, if all of the witnesses that we're interviewing are from a similar background, if they're all university profs, if they're all, older white male people, for example, we're not going to get that reflection in the legislation. And by the way, your comment about elected versus appointed, I mean, I've held elected office, so I understand the importance of that from a democratic perspective. When you're appointed, your role is different. You're not thinking about the next election. You're not thinking about who's going to vote for you or not. You're not thinking about fundraising for your next election. You're thinking only of that legislation and whether it makes sense from a community perspective. And I find that can be helpful. I'm not distracted by my decisions maybe costing me votes in an election, right? So there is some value to look at the appointment process in a different way, as long as your appointment process is fair, right? In the Senate now, you write an application, anybody can do it, and then it goes through a committee before the Prime Minister makes the final decision.
Okay, well, thanks for that enlightenment. One more question before we let you go. This question is very dear to my heart, and that is farm laborers. I don't know if you've gone to see them. I will cry if I actually try sharing the experience. Chrissy, did you know about this? Farm workers, how they are treated from Mexico, from Jamaica. One politician invited me to speak in some event he was doing, like 3 hours outside Toronto. Very, very small town. I think there are about 2,000 people there, and they are predominantly white. He told me that even their religion is the same, their color is the same, their belief is the same. But I was driving and I saw a black guy. I'm like, whoa, that's strange to see a black guy. And, my wife and I were discussing, and they said, oh, these are farm workers. We'll stop and say, hey, how you doing? He says from Jamaica. I'm like, oh, well, wow, that's good. So where you are? And he pointed where they are. It's almost like prison. Like this, they put all of them together in one room, work them tirelessly, and pay them almost nothing. And somebody's question here is, farm laborers, what is happening to change the foreign worker program and volunteer enslavement of these individuals? Is that radar for the Senate?
It is. So part of the work of senators to also, we are in chamber as well. So we are in committee, but when we are in the Senate chamber, we can get up, we can make speeches, we meet with ministers in that chamber on a regular basis. Those questions have come up, and we saw, particularly during the pandemic, right, what kinds of conditions folks were living in and how much more at risk they were of COVID, right, and other diseases. So you're quite right. I think, Alex, I would want to physically go and visit, as you did. I think that that's an instructive process, and that's something that I want to do. I'm an Ontario senator, not just a Cornwall senator, so there are things that I want to do. But yes, those questions are being raised. And I would say that the whole immigration file is on the table now, right? Every aspect of it, whether it's to Sunit's question about foreign students and about, foreign temporary workers, levels of immigration deal with the shortage of labor, the fact that we had less immigration during the COVID period, and we now need to catch up. Francophone immigration, so the Francophone communities in Canada are seeking immigration, smaller communities, the entire file is on the table. And so I would say that that's a good question about that, and I think that's also been raised in the Senate, and I also want to do more work in that area as well.
Yeah, so we want to appreciate you settling for that. I think it's quite obvious because we're talking about workplace equity. So if the Canada as a nation has a program to bring in immigrants to work in the farm, they deserve workplace equity. They deserve to be treated. So if you are bringing immigrants from Ireland and from Scotland, you don't put them in cages and they put them in a container. Container you put like a car in and ship to Africa. That's really where they put them. Like containers we saw, like you can literally go there in the night and pick up the container and throw it in the garbage, so to speak. So they've never seen, it's never been documented any farm workers coming from even Ukraine, where there's war, they don't put them in containers, not even close. These are not, you don't need research. You just drive there. I drive there to look around, right? So,
yeah, I will endeavor to do that for sure. Absolutely.
So corporate equity is not just in the corporations, like in the bank or in the government. It also is in the farm, right? In the daycare center and in other places people hardly look up to. So I know some of you still have questions, but we have to let the senator go. She has some big business to take care of. So, but we are going to stay here and answer your question as much as we can. And if we cannot answer it, then we'll take the question by email and send to us. So please allow me, everybody, to thank our honorable, passionate, and strong, committed, determined senator. I can't wait to come visit. I know you've extended a visit to us to come and see you in Ottawa. We are certainly going to make this happen to come and meet the group in Ottawa. So thank you very, very much for always answering the call. You talked about going to students, so it's not you make yourself available, and that is really what leadership is about, and not necessarily position of authority. May God bless you and have a fantastic week, and certainly a fantastic year making changes for the nation. God bless.
Merci. Thank you. We'll speak again.
Okay.
Yeah.